A dog blocks traffic in the middle of nowhere. A woman, haunted by loss, chooses to follow. A man lies broken beneath the weight of a storm-fallen tree, and a girl, bitter and silent, holds a letter she was never supposed to receive. These aren't separate stories. They are threads in one tapestry, and the weaver a golden retriever named Ranger, whose loyalty becomes the miracle that binds them all. This isn't a story about a dog. It's a story about trust, forgiveness, and how sometimes God sends his messengers with fur. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. The early morning mist hung low over the pine-covered hills of Pine Hollow, a small Colorado town where time felt like it moved slower than the rest of the world. The sky was an overcast blanket of pale gray, and the scent of wet bark and lingering rain clung to the cool air. The road cutting through the foothills, Cedar Pass, was narrow and cracked, with soft mud creeping over its edges after last night's thunderstorm. At this hour, few cars passed by, only the occasional trucker or forest ranger heading toward the ridge trails. Officer Megan Doyle, 35, adjusted her sunglasses as her patrol SUV crested the slope. Tall and athletic, with sandy blonde hair tied back into a neat ponytail. She had a presence that was both calm and quietly authoritative. Megan's face bore a softness around the eyes that time and tragedy had tried, but failed to harden completely. She wore the standard issue brown and green of the Colorado State Patrol, her badge worn smooth at the edges. The stillness of the mountains had once brought her comfort, but that was before she lost Ben. Ben Doyle had been a forestry officer, her partner in life, and, often, in field response. It had been nearly a year since the accident. A freak rockslide during a prescribed burn had buried half a team. Megan wasn't with him that day. She still wondered if that mattered. She was 2 miles from town when she spotted something unusual on the road ahead. At first, it looked like a clump of golden weeds, swaying in the breeze near the curve, but as she slowed, she saw it move steadily, purposefully. It was a dog, alone, soaked and coated in streaks of mud, its golden fur darkened and matted from last night's storm. She pulled over and stepped out, boots crunching on damp gravel. The wind cut sharp through her uniform, but the dog didn't flinch. It was a golden retriever, likely about 5 or 6 years old. Its eyes, amber with specks of gray, locked onto hers with a strange mix of alertness and urgency. It stood in the middle of the road, unmoving, blocking her path. Megan raised a hand instinctively. "Easy, boy or girl?" She murmured, "Where's your person?" The dog gave a sharp bark, then another. It didn't growl or cower. Instead, it took several steps toward the tree line, then turned its head to check if she was following. Another bark. It was deliberate, almost practiced. Megan frowned. This wasn't a stray. There was a collar, a simple black band with a plastic tag, now smeared with dirt. She stepped closer, but the dog darted just out of reach, giving a short whine before returning to its post at the roadside. Then it turned again, heading back toward the woods, pausing just at the threshold of pine and shadow. Looking back. "All right," Megan said under her breath. "This isn't normal." She clicked her radio. "Dispatch, this is Doyle. I've got an unaccompanied golden retriever on Cedar Pass, about mile marker 7. Appears domesticated. No visible injuries, but acting odd. Possible it's trying to lead me somewhere." A static pause. Then, "Copy, Officer Doyle. Any identifying tags?" She crouched near the edge of the road, watching the dog. "There's a collar, but the tag's unreadable. Might be an emergency transponder, can't tell." Requesting backup from search and rescue, just in case. Might be dealing with a lost hiker situation. Affirmative. Dispatching Griggs from Ranger Station West, ETA 20 minutes, as she waited. Megan studied the dog more closely. Male, from the size and stance. He was visibly agitated, ears perked, tail stiff. Every few seconds glancing toward the forest as if pressed for time. But he wasn't panicked. His every move suggested intention. A memory tugged at her. Ben kneeling in a similar posture years ago, comforting an injured search dog during a wildfire. Dogs don't panic without reason. He had said, if they're trying to tell you something, listen. The sound of a vehicle approaching broke her reverie. A dusty green pickup skidded slightly as it pulled in behind her SUV. Out stepped Tyler Griggs. 28. The youngest field technician at the Pine Hollow Ranger Station. Wiry and sunburnt, with a baseball cap permanently glued to his head. Tyler was a known go-getter with more field sense than polish. "Morning, Officer Doyle," he said, lifting a field pack onto his back. "Heard you've got a strange one." Megan nodded toward the dog, who now stood halfway between the road and the woods. "He's been like that since I arrived. Doesn't want food, doesn't run, just waits." Tyler gave a low whistle. "That's not just any stray, looks like a rescue dog. See the gait. Balanced, steady. That collar might be from a search and rescue set. You think he belongs to someone out there?" Megan asked. "I think he wants us to find out," as if on cue. The dog barked once more, then turned and began walking into the woods. Slowly, deliberately. Megan tightened her belt, checked her radio, and followed. The forest that unfolded beyond the roadside was a cathedral of towering ponderosa pines and whispering wind. The air was cooler here, laced with the sharp scent of sap and damp soil. Ranger moved ahead with purpose, tail low and alert, his golden coat a striking contrast against the shadowed green undergrowth. Officer Megan Doyle followed a few paces behind, boots crunching softly on pine needles, her hand near the grip of her sidearm not out of fear, but habit. Trailing them was Tyler Griggs, his rescue pack slung over one shoulder, his brows drawn in silent concentration. For a long stretch. No one spoke. The only sounds were the distant call of jays and the steady rhythm of the dog's paws. The terrain sloped downward, and they navigated a narrow ravine where roots curled like old fingers from the sides of the trail. Megan noticed how Ranger would occasionally glance back to ensure they were still following. His eyes filled not with panic, but determination, after nearly 15 minutes of steady movement. The dog stopped. They had reached a stream, shallow and clear, running fast from the previous night's storm. A moss-covered log stretched over the water like a makeshift bridge. Ranger crossed first with the nimbleness of instinct, then turned and barked once. "You sure about this?" Tyler asked, adjusting his footing. "I'm not sure about anything anymore," Megan replied, stepping onto the log with careful balance. "But that dog hasn't led us wrong yet." They reached the far side, where the trail turned rugged. Fallen branches littered the ground, and here and there, small piles of rock had tumbled loose from the slope above. About 10 feet ahead, Ranger stopped again, pawing at something partially buried in the mud. Tyler moved forward first, crouched, and cleared away the debris. "It's a backpack," he murmured. "Torn, soaked. Looks like it's been here since the storm." Megan leaned over his shoulder. The fabric was forest green with a stitched name patch, J. Wells. The zipper was split open, the contents partially spilled. A compass, a tin of matches, a plastic water bottle cracked at the rim. Next to it, streaked faintly across several wet leaves, was something else. Blood? Fresh enough, Tyler said grimly, brushing his fingers over the trail. Not a lot, but enough to say someone was moving. Megan took out her notepad. Augala Jackson Wells. That name came up on a missing persons call from the university last month. Environmental scientist, supposed to be conducting research on biodiversity near this ridge, and he's not the kind to wander off, Tyler added. Guys like him usually registered their movements to the hour. Ranger suddenly barked again, this time sharper. He took off up a small incline to the right, more like a deer trail than any proper path. Without waiting, Megan followed, her breath shallow now. Something was pulling them forward, urgency like a rope around her ribs. They didn't go far. At the crest of the slope, they came to a flattened patch of undergrowth. Something had rolled or fallen. Here, there were branches splintered inward, and among them, a broken limb of a pine tree, the trunk jagged as if split by force. Ranger paced in tight circles, then dashed toward a dark mass tucked between a boulder and the slanted slope. Megan and Tyler both saw it at the same time. A man, lying awkwardly beneath the trunk of a fallen tree. One leg clearly pinned and twisted at an unnatural angle. Megan rushed forward. "Sir, can you hear me?" A low groan escaped the man's lips. His face was pale, lips dry and cracked. Dirt streaked his forehead, and one hand twitched toward them before falling limp. "I've got him," Tyler shouted, dropping to his knees, conscious but shocky. Legs fractured, might be a compound break. The man blinked, eyes unfocused. "Ranger," he rasped. The dog barked softly in response and moved closer, sitting down just near the man's outstretched hand, tail still. Megan leaned over. "Mr. Wells? Jackson Wells." He gave the faintest nod. "We're here to help. My name is Megan Doyle. We're with State Patrol and Search and Rescue. You're going to be okay." Tyler was already pulling out an emergency thermal blanket and beginning a basic trauma check. "His vitals are weak but stable. We need to radio this in now," as Tyler made the call. Megan took a moment to scan the area beside the injured man, half buried under a flattened mess of brush. Was a waterproof case. She pulled it free and unlatched the clips. Inside were two things: a field notebook, thick and worn with soft edges, and a small envelope, sealed, with a name written in a neat hand, Ava Wells. Megan's breath caught. She opened the notebook and began to flip through the pages. Charts of local wildlife populations, weather patterns, maps marked in pencil, but scattered between them, paragraphs written in an almost journal-like tone. "Ava asked me why I keep going out here. I told her it's to protect what matters, but maybe I just wanted to prove something to myself since Eliza passed. Ranger has been a constant. I don't know what I'd do without him. I still haven't sent the letter. I'm afraid she won't read it." Megan closed the notebook slowly, her gloved fingers resting on the name. The guilt in those pages felt familiar, like her own memories echoing back through someone else's pen. A parent reaching out across silence. She turned back to Jackson. "We found your journal," she said softly, "and the letter for your daughter. We'll make sure she gets it." His lips moved slightly. "Tell her." But the words faded with his strength. Ranger laid his head gently on Jackson's shoulder. Eyes closed. They waited together like that until the sound of rotor blades approached in the distance. The helicopter blades had long faded into the distance, leaving behind only the low whisper of the trees and the weight of stillness in the clearing. Tyler had returned to meet the extraction team halfway, leaving Officer Megan Doyle alone with Ranger and the now unburdened space where Jackson Wells had lain minutes earlier. The pine-scented air felt calmer now, but Megan remained kneeling beside Ranger, running her hand slowly along his damp, dirt-matted fur. The golden retriever sat quietly, his head tilted just slightly, ears tuned to the sound of the wind and distant footsteps, as if still waiting for his human to reappear. "He'll be okay," she said softly, unsure whether she meant it for the dog or herself. After a few more moments, Megan rose, collected the field journal, and began the trek back toward the trailhead. Ranger followed without needing to be told. There was no leash, no command, just silent understanding. By the time Megan reached the ranger station's medical outpost, the sun was low behind the western ridge, casting golden beams through the trees like broken lantern light. Inside, the small wood-framed clinic smelled of antiseptic, pine oil, and old plaster. Ranger hesitated at the door before stepping in, ears low, eyes searching. Jackson lay on a cot near the window, his leg in a clean temporary splint. IV attached to his arm, a nurse, a wiry man named Dr. Carl Bingham, who looked to be in his late 60s with a trimmed white beard and slow, deliberate movements, was finishing bandaging the last of the abrasions on Jackson's shoulder. "Ah, there he is," Jackson murmured as Ranger stepped closer. His voice was raspier now, tired but filled with a warmth that hadn't been there in the forest. Megan stood at the foot of the cot, arms crossed. "I figured you two might want some time together." Ranger nuzzled Jackson's hand gently, tail wagging once, then settling beside the bed like a soldier on watch. Jackson reached down and scratched behind Ranger's ear. He knew what to do. He said, even after all this time. Megan pulled over a chair. "He's not just any dog, is he?" Jackson gave a slow, crooked smile. "No, he's not." There was a quiet beat before he added, "Ranger was trained for this, not by me alone. My wife, Elena, was the heart behind it. She was a vet, and stubborn in all the best ways. We worked together with animals, taught them to work with people. Ranger was our first official success." Megan leaned forward slightly, the light catching the gold trim of her badge. "What happened to her pancreatic cancer?" Jackson said, voice low but steady. "Took her in less than 8 months. She kept working right up until she couldn't stand anymore. She believed Ranger wasn't just a dog, he was a bridge between wild and domestic, between people and the places they forgot how to care for." Megan nodded slowly. "He's something else, that's for sure." After she passed, Jackson continued, "I kept Ranger on light duties, still brought him on hikes, studies, some outreach with the schools, but I could tell he wasn't the same. Neither was I." He shifted slightly in the cot, wincing when the storm hit. "I was on the upper ridge trail. Soil was already loose. A lightning strike knocked down a pine. I didn't even hear it until it was on me. My locator got crushed under the tree. I had 2 choices, lie there and wait for no one, or give Ranger a chance. So I did what Elena used to train for, attached the backup emergency tag to his harness, and gave him the release word." Megan's eyes narrowed slightly. "What was it?" Jackson smiled. "Go find. It's what Elna always used. It means more than just run. It means you know what to do." Ranger perked his ears at the sound of the phrase. Megan glanced at him and felt a strange warmth stir in her chest. For a moment, she didn't feel like an officer in uniform or a widow who avoided looking at family photo frames. She felt human. "Seen, you know," she said after a moment. "My husband was like that too. Not a dog," she added with a faint smirk. "He was a search and rescue ranger, ran wilderness response up near Glenwood Springs. We used to joke that he could find a needle in a haystack if it was under 3 feet of snow." Jackson's face softened. "I take it you lost him." Megan nodded. "Prescribed burn went sideways. He didn't make it out." She looked away, her voice quieter. "I used to go hiking all the time, every weekend. We had this trail we'd go to after long shifts, just to hear the wind and forget about sirens. After he died, I stopped. I stayed out of the woods, stayed away from dogs, from everything we shared." She looked at Ranger, who now rested his head on his paws beside Jackson's bed. "I didn't think I'd be back here, and then that dog just stood in the road like he was daring me to follow him." Jackson watched her a long moment, then nodded. Maybe he was. A knock at the door interrupted them. A woman entered, about 50, wearing forest green rescue gear and a worn fleece vest embroidered with the Pine Hollow seal. This was Rachel Lyman, the head of field response at the station, tall and sharp-eyed, with a brisk demeanor and iron-gray hair pulled into a bun. Rachel had the energy of someone who had led more rescues than she could count, and remembered the names of every soul she couldn't save. "Sorry to intrude," she said, "just checking vitals and making sure you both don't start getting too philosophical and forget to drink water." She gave Megan a nod of recognition. "You did good today." Megan shrugged modestly. It was Ranger who found him. Rachel looked down at the golden retriever. "He's something special. Looks like he's ready to go again." "He always is," Jackson said, "even when I'm not." The hospital in Aspen Ridge was a modest, two-story structure nestled at the base of a sloping hill, built with timber beams and sandstone. It blended into the pines around it, as if trying not to disturb the landscape. Morning sunlight filtered through thin clouds, softening the chill left behind by the night. Inside, the halls were quiet but alive with the muffled rhythm of machines, nurses' footsteps, and the low murmur of lives in repair. Jackson Wells rested in room 203. A vase of coneflowers sat on the windowsill, placed there by an anonymous nurse. He hadn't spoken much since arriving. The painkillers dulled more than just the fracture in his leg, they dulled time itself. Ranger lay curled beside the hospital bed, loyal and quiet, eyes watching the door with the patience of a sentry. Down the hallway, Ava Wells, age 10, sat rigid in a molded plastic chair, her hands folded in her lap, knuckles white from the grip. She had Jackson's intense eyes, but her mother's delicate features, light brown hair pulled into a too-tight braid. A small frame draped in an oversized red hoodie. Her face was guarded, lips set in the kind of line that didn't belong on a child's face. The woman seated next to her, Lauren Chenoweth, was her cousin on her mother's side, a cheerful woman in her 30s with warm brown skin and hazel eyes, dressed in a puffy navy coat and jeans speckled with dog fur. Lauren rubbed Ava's back gently. "He's awake now. Sweetie, just resting." Ava said nothing. She stared at the floor, jaw locked. Megan Doyle stepped into the corridor, holding something wrapped in a plastic hospital sleeve. She looked different out of uniform, darker jeans, a forest green sweater, and hiking boots that still carried the scent of pine and dried mud. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her expression was gentler than usual, but careful, measured. She crouched next to Ava, her voice soft. "Hi, Ava. I'm Megan. I was there with your dad. He's okay. He talked about you." Ava's eyes lifted, wary. "I found something in the forest," Megan said, unwrapping the sleeve. "It's from your dad. He meant to give it to you." Inside were 2 letters, both on slightly wrinkled paper, folded many times, the creases worn from being handled often. One was clearly older, the ink smudged, the other was newer, the handwriting sharper, but with sections scratched out and reworded. evidence of hesitation. Ava looked at them like they might burn her fingers. Lauren gave her a small nod. After a moment's pause, Ava reached out and took the letters. She didn't open them, just held them, tight, against her chest. "Can I show you someone?" Megan asked, rising. She motioned gently toward the hallway. Ava stood, slowly, following without speaking. They passed by a wall lined with photographs of hospital staff and wildlife, an odd but local pairing until they reached room 203. Megan paused outside the doorway. "He's sleeping now, but Ranger's in there. Do you want to meet him?" Ava gave a small nod. Megan pushed the door open, quietly, inside. Jackson dozed under a pale blue blanket. Ranger stirred but didn't rise. He looked toward Ava and tilted his head, tail giving a slow, gentle sweep against the floor. Ava stepped in hesitantly, the letters still clutched in one hand. She stood just inside the room. Ranger looked at her, then did something he hadn't done since Jackson's injury. He stood up. He approached Ava, head low, tail moving gently, slowly. He pressed his snout against her side, then lowered himself and rested his chin lightly on her foot. Ava's breath caught, her lip trembled. She dropped to her knees, holding the letters in one hand while her other reached out toward the dog's ears. "He came back for him," Megan said softly. "Through the woods, over a river, across a highway. Your dad trained him with your mom. He didn't give up. Not on your dad, not on you." Ava blinked hard, then looked toward the hospital bed. Her father stirred slightly, eyes cracking open. Ava Jackson's voice was raspy, uncertain. The girl stood slowly. The letter in her hand trembled. "I got your notes," she said, barely above a whisper. Jackson pushed himself up with difficulty, wincing. I wanted to say it sooner. I just didn't know how." "You left," she said, her voice breaking. "When she died, you left me. I know," Jackson murmured. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I needed space to work through it, but I left you alone. And I will never stop being sorry for that." He looked at her, eyes full of tears. "I never stopped loving you." Ava stood frozen, the tears starting in silence before her shoulders shook with them. Ranger leaned into her side gently, his weight solid and warm. She crossed the room in 3 steps and threw herself into her father's arms. Megan turned away, giving them privacy. Her eyes misted. She stepped back into the hallway where Lauren waited. Lauren smiled, blinking fast. "I haven't seen Ava cry since the funeral." "She wouldn't even cry then, sometimes," Megan said. "It takes someone who can't talk to bring out what we need to say." They stood in silence for a moment longer. Then Lauren asked, "Will you be visiting again?" Megan nodded. "Yeah, I think I will," inside the room. Ranger settled at the foot of the bed once more. Father and daughter sat in shared silence, surrounded by tubes, blankets, and the fragile beginnings of healing. Spring in Pine Hollow arrived not with a grand fanfare but with subtle, sacred shifts, the slow bloom of wild lupines across forest clearings, the snowmelt streams whispering louder by the day, and the light, softer, longer, warmer, casting everything in the hue of renewal. Near the edge of the Pine Hollow Wildlife Conservation Center, nestled among lodgepole pines and winding trails, stood a modest timber-framed cabin with wide windows and a stone porch. It belonged now to Jackson Wells and his daughter, Ava. Jackson had traded the chaos of academic life for something slower but more immediate. His gait was still uneven from the injury, but he moved with growing confidence, aided by a carved wooden walking stick gifted by a former ranger friend. He wore his silver-streaked brown hair shorter now and sported a trimmed beard that lent him a rustic air. His face, once hollow from grief, had softened, not free of sorrow, but no longer ruled by it. Each morning, he sipped coffee on the porch and watched Ranger greet the sunrise with ears perked and tail wagging. Ranger had taken to his new role with the same quiet dignity that had guided him through the forest months before. At 6 years old, his golden coat had begun to fade just slightly around the muzzle, but his eyes remained keen and his movements sure. He now wore a vest, a deep forest green with a stitched patch. Wildlife ambassador, ask me about my human. His days were spent interacting with visitors, comforting nervous schoolchildren, or demonstrating search and scent routines for small conservation classes. Megan Doyle had changed too. The grief that once lay coiled beneath her uniform had slowly unwound. She no longer avoided the woods. In fact, she had started leading weekend excursions, safety and solace. The program was called Designed for Local Youth, particularly those struggling with trauma or loss. Her presence was calm and grounding, her voice both instructional and warm. She still wore the badge, but it no longer felt like armor, it felt like purpose. This Saturday, she arrived early at the center, her weathered SUV crunching over the gravel driveway. A group of students from the local elementary school waited in a semicircle near the learning pavilion. Clutching notepads and granola bars, Megan stepped out, her long jacket fluttering in the breeze. Her frame was tall and lean, hair still in that signature ponytail, but today there was a playful energy in her stride. She walked toward the enclosure where Ranger stood near the gate, already anticipating her arrival. Ava, now visibly taller and more relaxed, stood beside him, her sketchbook under one arm and a pencil tucked behind her ear. "You're early," Ava said, her voice lighter than it had been in months. Megan grinned. "I heard Ranger wanted first pick of snacks. He likes the peanut butter kind," Ava replied, scratching behind Ranger's ear. "But don't tell the vet." The morning session began shortly after. Megan introduced the kids to Ranger, telling the story, but not the whole story, of how he had once saved a man by finding help in the forest. She spoke of instinct, loyalty, and the bond between animals and humans that transcended training. The kids, wide-eyed, took turns asking questions, and Ava surprised everyone by stepping forward to explain how Ranger responded to specific scent cues and hand signals. Watching her speak, Jackson leaned against the wooden railing just outside the cabin, a cup of tea in hand. He was joined by Rachel Lyman, still head of field operations, dressed in her usual uniform of flannel, utility pants and hiking boots. She offered him a nod of approval. "You've raised a confident one," she said. Jackson chuckled. "She's always been strong, just needed the space to grow into it." Rachel gave him a sideways glance. "You, too," later that afternoon, after the kids had boarded their bus and the pavilion quieted. Megan, Jackson, and Ava took to the trail behind the center, a path that looped through old growth pines, across a gentle stream and back to the main road. Ranger trotted slightly ahead, stopping every now and then to sniff the air or glance back at his humans. They walked in companionable silence until they reached a flat rock outcropping overlooking a valley stitched with wildflowers. They sat together, Jackson lowering himself carefully to the ground, Ava sprawling beside Ranger, and Megan leaning back on her elbows, face turned to the breeze. "This place," Megan began, then paused. "I used to be afraid of it after Ben died. The trees felt too quiet, like they knew something I didn't." Jackson didn't interrupt. He knew the rhythm of shared silence. "But now," she continued, "it's like I can hear his voice again. Not in a ghost way, In a memory way, I think. Ranger helped me get here. Ava looked up. He helped all of us. Ranger, sensing the stillness, stood and stretched, then walked over to Megan and rested his head on her knee. She smiled, placing a hand gently on his brow. Jackson looked out over the trees, his voice thoughtful. We don't always get to choose how we return, but sometimes we're brought back anyway by someone who remembers. As the sun began to dip behind the pines, casting long golden rays across the path, the trio stood and turned toward home. Megan on one side, Jackson on the other, and Ava in between with a ranger by her side. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They were together. They were home, sometimes. Miracles don't come with thunder or lightning, sometimes. They come on 4 muddy paws and a loyal heart that refuses to give up. In a world that often feels broken, we are reminded through a dog like Ranger that love, trust, and redemption can still find a way. Jackson was found. Ava was healed. Megan rediscovered her purpose. None of it would have happened without a creature sent ahead of them, like a whisper from heaven. Maybe it wasn't just training. Maybe it was a divine plan. Just like Ranger answered the call, we too are called to forgive, to reconnect, and to never lose hope in the ones we love, in the quiet of the forest or the noise of everyday life. God still sends His messengers, sometimes they just have fur. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that healing is real, and love can return even through the deepest woods. Leave a comment with Amen if you believe in second chances. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of hope. And may God bless you and guide your steps, just like He guided Ranger.